Hello, 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 and welcome back to IVF in Your Pocket, your waiting room companion. I'm your host, Alexandra Gary Stuck. I'm a therapist in San Francisco, California. In today's episode, I'm answering a question from Em about going through consultation tips and questions and kind of orienting to the beginning of the IVF process. And so this episode is going to start a brief overview talking about why we have consultations to begin with, and then going into some tips and questions and kind of orienting to the beginning of the IVF process. And so this episode is going to start a brief overview talking about why we have consultations to begin with, and then going into some really important questions to ask in the initial consultation, and then finally ending the episode with some just emotional tips and tools for that process. So a consultation, you'll often hear this if you've just started the journey, is something that happens at the beginning of your IVF journey. It's really an orientation into IVF. And it's something that you do with your RE, your reproductive endocrinologist, to get a sense of how they work and to get a sense of how they're viewing your particular case and what their plan is for your IVF. Now, this is a crucial step in the process, and we could think of consultations as IVF dating. Yes, IVF dating. And so it's a bit nerve-wracking, but a very important thing to know at this stage in the process is that it's good to actually have a couple different consultations if you're in the position to do so. That's okay that you're kind of shopping around, that's anticipated, and it's really important to find a good fit. If you're in the position where you can look at a couple different IVF clinics under your insurance, or if you're private pay, that's a really lovely opportunity to see who you resonate with, who you think is going to be the best person or best clinic to hold your hand through this really intense time. The other thing it does is it gives you an opportunity to hear different perspectives on your case and get a sense of how the different REs are thinking about your case. And that can be really helpful, which protocols they might use, which set of medications, what's the dosage, what kind of testing are they recommending. And that really helps you have a sense of the direction in which they're going. Consultations are usually long-ish relative to other time you might spend with your RE, so that's an important thing to know too, and an important time. It sometimes is about an hour, and so that might be as much time as you get with your RE. So it's a really kind of crucial, special time. In terms of what to ask in the consultation, there are a lot of questions you might ask, and this obviously varies depending on your case and why you're coming into IVF, why you're building your family this way. It's not necessarily infertility, and so that's going to slightly kind of influence the kind of questions you might ask. But I'm going to give you a couple questions that are really good questions to ask in your consultation, that are kind of staple questions you might want to ask. 1, how many rounds of IVF are you and your partner going to need? This one is really important and often not asked, because people come into consultation and think they're just going to do one round of IVF, and that mostly isn't always the case. So you want to go in and get your RE's perspective on how many rounds you and your partner might need, and how many embryos you need for your desired family outcome. There was a study done, I think, a couple years ago now that said, I think it's 3 genetically normal embryos are needed for 1 live birth. Those are the stats. So that's kind of a lot. So that's just something to think about. Don't quote me on that, please. 2, getting a summary of your case, an idea of how likely it is that you're going to have, quote, success or get to your desired outcome. It's good to get your RE's perspective on that, and REs are good with numbers, so they might be able to give you a statistical number so you have some context, but a kind of summary of what you're up against, what is needed in order to get to your desired outcome. This is particularly frustrating, this question, if you're up against something like unexplained infertility. But oftentimes the RE can still give you a summary based on other factors in your clinical experience, in your case. Another really important question is understanding what additional tests are out there for your particular case. And even if the clinic doesn't do it, you still want to know all the tests that are done out there. And then the follow-up question is, does the clinic perform these tests? Because some IVF clinics will not perform certain tests, and you want to just be educated about what tests, additional tests are out there. Another good question is asking about what kind of supplements you can be taking to prepare your body for this process. And a lot of REs now will give you a list of supplements they believe are effective. Sometimes that's not a long list, but they will give a list. And sometimes that also, if you're doing this journey with a partner, can include what your partner might take. And finally, I think a really, really important question to ask is, what are my other options for building my family that we haven't discussed? Now, sometimes this can be a hard question to ask, but I think it's really important to get it out on the table, everything on the table before you embark, just so you know that if your plan A doesn't work, there is a plan B. So, for example, if you're deciding to use your own eggs, you might want to talk about what does it mean to look at using donor eggs, or just get a sense, or gestational carrier, getting a sense of what all your options are, laying it all out. Another good question is to ask what the timeline is. How long is this going to take? And if you're on a particular timeline that something feels more urgent, that's a good time to talk about that with the RE. You want a sense of what they anticipate, how long it's going to take, what they are anticipating, because oftentimes it can be longer than anticipated. So there's a lot of other questions you can ask, but I think this is a good start, a good staple. I might circle back to this in upcoming episodes because there's just so much to cover here. I want to move now to some tips, some things you might want to be telling yourself as you embark on this journey, some things to keep in mind. I think the biggest one of the biggest ones, is to remember that you can ask your RE and care team questions, and should ask them questions along the way. A good care team wants to answer your questions, and this is your right. You have a right to know what's happening to your body and in this process at every step of the way. Along with that, it's really important to be able to understand what's being explained to you in a language that you can understand. So if you need something clarified, if there's been something really medical or scientific thrown at you, you can go back and get clarification and ask for a simpler explanation. And again, if something isn't feeling right, if it doesn't feel like you have the right care team or the right RE, it's time to look around. So a big message of this episode is, please feel empowered, and I hope you feel empowered to shop around and get a right fit clinic and RE, because ideally they are such an ally in this process. And finally, it's so important to acknowledge everything that you've gone through to get to this point. You might have been through a lot already, and embarking on this journey can feel nerve-wracking and scary and uncertain, and all that is normal and to be expected. And give yourself a lot of space for your feelings. This process may take longer or be filled with unexpected bumps, and it's so important to know that that is a part of the process typically, and that you're not alone. There's support out there, and I'm hoping this podcast adds a little support to you on this journey. That concludes our episode for today, Em. I hope you have an excellent consultation. I hope you get the clarity you need. Until next time, remember, you are not alone.